here. Earlier I was at a site, Isthmia, and I may have had a little bit of a tech problem. I'm not sure. There's the Temple of Apollo glistening in the background. So hopefully bear with me, and I'm going to do a little reverse here, show you what I am looking at the site. Corinth was one of the most important classical sites because of its location. And if you look right up there, that is called Corinth. Believe it or not, yes, that is actually, there is a structure up there, a castle. Also kind of served as like a fort. It's very high. You can take a taxi up there if you're very, I'm not sure how long it would take to hike, to be honest, or if one should. But so yeah, this is the site of Corinth, where it's very large and spread out. That is what is remaining of the Temple of Apollo, who's one of the main deities here that was worshipped. Essentially, this was built by the Greeks. The Romans did destroy it somewhere around, I believe, the middle 2nd century. They did do rebuilding, so you do have Roman architecture as well, sitting on top of the ancient Greek. But to go back to its importance had to do with the fact that if you look down towards this way, and we can't see it really from here, this angle, there is the sea. And the famous Corinth canal, at the isthmus, essentially. What that does is it divides the western part of the Mediterranean from the eastern part. So it was a lot safer for sailors to come that way than to go around the Peloponnese to the open sea there. And it wasn't about the sea alone, it was really probably to do with piracy and other things that have always been happening throughout history. And so essentially they came up with a road, believe it or not, that was built and allowed the ships to be transported over land using pulleys and wheels, so that they wouldn't have to go sailing that way, but they would, until they had the canal built. And Nero is really the emperor responsible for finishing that job. So it was that sort of strategic location for trade, and there was a lot of commerce going on. A lot of the artifacts that were dug up from this site scan a lot of different cultural groups, whether it's from the Near East, whether it's, of course, Greek and later the Roman, but the Romans were great traders themselves, and this was a very common thing in ancient times. You would see a lot of this sort of cross-cultural connection during various festivals. I think when I did the video earlier up at Isthmia, I mentioned the Isthmus, the very famous Isthmus festival. That was held every 2 years or so, kind of staggered with the Olympics. So you'd have the Olympics, then the next year the Isthmus festival, and essentially that was based around sports, athleticism, and some music, but it was really a way to honor athletes and their sort of accomplishments. And so it would cover wrestling, of course, running, long jumping, all the things that when we think of, you know, the famous pottery, you see the scenes on pottery of wrestling matches and stuff on the different amphora, and this is where that comes from. So if you look here, this site is excavated yearly by the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. This is one of their major sites, and you can see they've opened up a lot. If we come over here, there are Roman bathhouses here, of course, as they are everywhere, which is not surprising. Now, what makes Corinth interesting, a little different from just a purely ritual site, is you will have the housing, the actual housing where people lived. So the domus and that, so there would be rooms and homes versus just temples and structures that have to do with carrying out various ritual activities. So you will always have your temples, as I just showed you there, and Apollo being very important to the ancient Greeks, as was Poseidon. So in Corinth, Poseidon would have been the other on par, equally kind of important deity there because of the location close to the sea. So we're coming over here. I'm going to see if this is actually the bath houses over here. And it always looks, when you go to a site like this, you know, you think, it's a lot of rocks, it's a lot of leftover pottery, now and then laying scattered on the ground, like you see little sherds here and there, you know, from tossed up from previous excavations and stuff. But it does all kind of make sense if you if we could just imagine, using your imagination here, and if I could do a little AI trick, which I can't right now, I could rebuild this all and bring it back to life. So this section here, I believe, is where the baths were, right down there. So, and the same as we see in the other site of the classical period is that you've got the piping and you've got water run through different channels, so that they were able to access the water via a type of plumbing system that would have existed and functioned very well, whether they tapped into, usually it was into natural spring water reservoirs. And if it didn't exist, if there wasn't a natural spring reservoir, then what they would do is find a way to bring the water so that they were able to, run the water through the pipes. So those were your choices. They've got waterproof cement that the Romans excelled in, of course. And here you have, so you might have, if you've studied art, you might have studied a bit on the architecture, the Ionic Doric columns, and then the third is always the Corinthian, which is what you're looking at right now. So this sort of elaborate leafy structure that, and you can see almost looks like leaves coming down. So they believe that the sculptor who came up with this essentially saw a woman carrying a basket on her head, and she was carrying some wonderful, bountiful plants that were flowing over, and he was influenced to create the Corinthian column. And it's known as the Corinthian column because it's very prevalent and sort of stems from a sculptor, probably, obviously, I would say, from Corinth. And Corinth is a very major site. If you're going to come to Greece, by the way, this is a processual, this is a walkway here, right here, this sort of what I'm walking on, literally, right now in modern times. These walkways appear everywhere. They appear in towns, they appear in basically also on walkways towards temples like you would see at the Acropolis. Athens also has a few of these processual ways that still exist. So I am showing you a little bit of this right now. And yeah, some of the columns, they've you can see they've fallen down. Now, remember, the site was destroyed by the Romans, as I said, and it's usually going to always be a destruction by natural disaster. Greece is prone to earthquakes. It's nothing shocking. It has over 1,000 smaller seismic movements a year, some bigger. Fortunately, hopefully, none too damaging or destructive, but in the past they have been hit by earthquakes that were not so kind. So that is always, and there's this whole thing of, you have to understand what the different historical periods, whether it's an Islamic period under the Ottomans later, whether it's the Venetians, and the Romans, I have to tell you, were notorious plunderers, not a shock, borrowers of all things. What they were obsessed with was bronze from Corinth. Apparently Corinthian bronze was very well made. It was fabulous. Great skilled craftsmen. And the Romans, when they would invade a site like this, a town, the bronze didn't really stand much chance. It was going to be reused and taken back to Rome, whatever great. So a lot of statues, like the famous, there was one of Poseidon made of bronze, and in most sites, it's very rare. I believe the one that is in the National Museum in Athens was actually found under the sea. The only reason it sort of was intact and kind of able to be found in modern times is simply because it got submerged underwater, probably when sea levels rose. We talked about that in some of my other videos, which I'd like to explore more. But for now, I just want to introduce you to some of the more main sites in Greece. And Corinth is, if you are studying classical history, you're going to study Corinth. It also has that great ability of having different sort of remaining monuments with text, which are very important. So you've got texts in ancient Greek and some with Latin. So that's always a bonus because those tell historians and archaeologists sometimes a lot about who was ruling, who was being worshipped in terms of a deity, what sort of was on their mind, you know, the builders. We see these sites and say, well, what were they thinking? Well, texts are a great asset because we can't really, as I said, we can't time travel. So what we can do is we can kind of look at the texts and analyze them and, you know, see what was going on in terms of a lot of times, you know, if you're dealing with a burial or you're dealing with a sarcophagus, you're going to have texts that are dedicated to the person who is buried. It may be a loved one, a lost soldier, and that will tell you also about what was going on. So yeah, this is just, it's a beautiful day here at Corinth. And by the way, I showed you that shot of the Temple of Apollo. I'll see if I can get another shot coming up the stairs here. And let's see here what we've got going on. If we come over here, there we go. I want to show you that. So if you're on the other side of that, looking at that, this would have been towards the front. What I'm looking at right now, the side that greets most visitors is the back of the temple. Right, so that is what's remaining of that. And very, very famous shot. A lot of people come here for that. And yeah, it is probably one of the largest intact sites that is still. So the road, as I mentioned, the processional road is, here we have our sign, the Propylaea. Okay, so that's your term for the processional roads that usually take you from one area to another. But the important thing with the ritual sense, they take you from one space to a sacred space. So a safe space that is not sacred. And as you go through the whole road, you're sort of entering into another world where you were, the idea was to be closer to the deities and to carry out whatever sacrifice and rituals they had to. All right, so signing off, and hope you enjoy your little journey there in Corinth.